Hi there, I'm Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm here with Kathleen Wiley. I'm a composer-performer. Kathleen is a Jungian analyst, and we are here to talk about fear of shining. So, Kathleen, when I suggested these topics today, that was the one that jumped up to both of us. And I'm personally experiencing this fear of shining because I had an opportunity to re-release a project that was really my biggest production project I've ever done, where I got a huge grant from an amazing philanthropist who basically said, I want you to put in video form what I saw out there on stage. And then my goal was to bring people even closer than the front row in a huge performance with Symphony Orchestra, you know, a 3,000 member audience, but to bring people into the intimacy of that. And that has now been on the, we are now presenting it on the internet for a brief amount of time. And it's certainly brought up issues for me of what it means to shine. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with my online academy. I've built this online academy, and it was something I really wanted to do to share what I've learned as an improvising harpist. And because of the situation right now we're recording this is in the pandemic, suddenly people are understanding the need for creative expression and to be able to connect through in this time where there's so much disconnect, and to connect, through creative things, and also to be able to connect with others. So suddenly there's all this shining happening, and this musical I've been working on for years and years, we're suddenly producing it. Even in the midst of this pandemic, we're producing it using virtual technology. And so all these things are happening. All this shining is starting to happen in my life, and it's yeah. And I'm sure that happens to other people, that when you put something into place, you're in a position where things aren't working, and you start putting something into play that's going to help you. You take a class, or you learn something, or you just get more confidence, or you get a partner, and it starts to actually open you up. And there you are appearing and shining, or beginning to shine, beginning to see your light in a way that you haven't seen it before. And I have, every morning when I go through my routine, I say, who am I? I'm an ambassador to music and imagination. And I ask myself, well, what am I living for? And I say, I'm living to step out of my own darkness with a light that only illuminates when I connect with others. And I think that's true of many of us, that we step out of our own darkness with a light we may not know we have, but it illuminates when we start connecting with others. And when that connection starts expanding, we start seeing that light, and we see ourselves in that light. And that's a level of vulnerability that we, that's a little bit, yeah. So I'll bet that happens a lot, and you have a lot to say about it. So.
Well, it does happen a lot. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about that two primary energies that are always at work are expansion and contraction. And we know that's true in how our bodies work physically, but it's also true emotionally, mentally, and energetically. And when you start to shine and you're more out there in the public eye, as you are with these projects, with the Academy, with the Invention and Alchemy streaming, then that's an expansion. And so expansion always pulls us out of our comfort zone. It pulls us out of our sense of who we are, because our sense of who we are now has to change. It has to grow. And it will always bring up any early experiences where we got shamed when we expanded. Because, from 2 to 4 years of age are called the terrible 2s and 3s. And it's because all of a sudden at 2 and 3, we all have this autonomy where we can start to expand our horizons. We can start to move on our own. And sometimes that doesn't work well for the caregivers around us. And in their attempt to keep us safe and to keep things running smoothly, we may inadvertently get shamed for that. And shamed to such a degree that it actually shuts down our impulse to move.
Can you talk a little bit about shame and how what it might look like? Like if I was a little kid and I was, I don't know, pulling the cat's tail or doing something which I did. I admit it. What might the shaming, what is the actual anatomy or physiology of that shaming? What happens? How might it look? How might the caregiver express it? How might it look? What might happen inside of me? And then and then how might that get ingrained in my understanding of the world?
Yeah, those are all good questions. So I'm going to see if I can give the Cliff Note answers. So one example is that if you're pulling the cat's tail and all of a sudden the caregiver yells at you, "I can't believe that! You're such a bad little girl! You're making my life miserable! Look at you! You've hurt the cat!" And they respond in a way that says, "You are bad for doing what you just did." Versus a parent that says, "Oh, honey, we can't pull a cat's tail. That hurts. Remember how when your little sister pulled your hair and it didn't feel good? We don't want to do that." That doesn't shame and make you feel bad as a person, but it helps you say, okay, that's not a behavior I want to do. You know, so the primary difference between a setting of a boundary or a teaching of a value is that shame makes one feel as if they are bad at their core. And we all know what shame feels like in our body, because all of a sudden we freeze, we don't want to be seen, we want to hide, we go into a lot of self-deprecation. So shame that's toxic paralyzes. And it's different than learning that a behavior is wrong, bad, or destructive, because you end up feeling as if you as a person are wrong, bad, and destructive. And that paralyzes.
That makes a lot of sense. So is it in part because the caregiver wasn't able to make the connection? This thing you did is not, it's not what you want to be doing. You don't want to be doing that. You think you do, but you don't. Versus just something that doesn't make any sense, but just you get the feeling like, oh, that was like, oh, wait, stop. Yeah.
Well, you know, we all respond like we've been conditioned, which we get conditioned through our relationship to other people. So what you were saying about starting to shine and see your light in relationship to other people is very true. So the other thing that can happen in relationship to other people is our light gets dampened. Our light gets shut down. And so caregivers who respond in that way, that's probably how someone responded to them at some point. And so it's just an automatic response. They don't think about it. We are still all in the Western world collectively in our psyches trying to redeem ourselves from the puritanical notions of original sin and how bad we are from the beginning. Somehow they left out the part we're created in the image of God, which would mean so the other thing is that we are all collectively still working to free ourselves from that kind of attitude that we are innately bad, and to really redeem that, no, we're innately godlike. We have this spark of creative light that wants to give light to the good, true, and beautiful.
I hope I'm not going far afield here, because I'm very interested in the mechanism by which by which this happens. And I keep going back to literature. Mm-hmm. And so one of my very favorite novels is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which most people haven't read. And this novel, Frankenstein is created and is a perfect being. He's brilliant, he's kind, everything about him. He just looks scary. And because he looks scary, his creator, Victor Frankenstein, shuns him and will not, and so Frankenstein, the monster, goes out looking for connection in the world. Mm-hmm. And every time he wants to make connection through love, he's shunned, and then finally goes back to his creator and says, okay, fine, you've made me ugly and scary. Okay, well, can I please just have a mate? I mean, don't put me in this world without love. Mm-hmm. And his creator, literally his creator, is just like, no, I'm not going to do that. In fact, his creator promises him to do that and then won't do it. And so I think about this a lot as the experience of being a being of utter light. I mean, when Frankenstein comes to life, I mean, utter life and light and love and joy, and that being twisted. You see it happen through the book. I'm reading another, I don't know why I read these, but another classic science fiction by H.G. Wells called The Island of Dr. Moreau, in which animals are shaped into being more human-like. And and then what happens because of that and their animal nature. But what's important to me about it is that I can see that these writers were exploring what happens to us as creations when we are met with, like in the Island of Dr. Moreau, where all our animalness is like, taken out of us. Mm-hmm. And in Frankenstein, we come to life and we are seen as the beautiful beings we are. And so I can see that they're it's not a literature lesson here, but these are, I feel like these novels are helping me to look through this. Now, did anything I say there kind of spark any understanding of this shining?
Well, what you're talking about that those novels illustrate is just how human beings, how we end up turning on ourselves and other people. Because somewhere early on, instead of our need for love and for affirmation being met, that being given to us, that's withheld. And sometimes not only is it withheld or absent, but we get the opposite of that. We get the verbal demeaning, the verbal put downs. So then something in us gets distorted, just like you're talking about in these two novels. And so that is the mechanism. It's what happens in relationship to someone in the outside world that then sets in motion a template of how we relate to ourselves internally, that then begins to become the guiding light or non-light of our life.
Like the guiding darkness of our life.
That's right. Yeah.
So, as you were talking, the word monstrous came to me. Mm-hmm. because it gets used in these novels, bestial or monstrous, that these creatures became monstrous. And I didn't mean for this conversation to get this dark, but it is dark because we are always going from our darkness. We are always coming out of our darkness with a light we often don't know we have, that can either be illuminated or squelched.
Yes, and I want to just add, and in terms of psychologically, what ends up being monstrous is that which is non-human, which means non-relational. Because you said earlier, again, that part of what you're experiencing, even with the projects you're doing now, is seeing yourself more fully in relationship. And so the human connection is what is so vital. So when the Dalai Lama says, my religion is loving kindness, and Jesus, who was elevated to the status of Christ, says the great commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And that same teaching is found in all spiritual traditions. I can't quote them all from the sacred text, but they're there. That's the human connection. And so part of what we are still all doing collectively as a society and as humanity is we are really still trying to live into what does that mean and how do we do that? How do we begin to be in relationship compassionately when we disagree with each other? When one of us has values that the other one doesn't? because we still live in a world that's very much wants to make one side monstrous and one side angelic. But the truth is they're one and the same. You know, that which Frankenstein's desire for connection wasn't monstrous, but it did result in some behaviors that could get labeled that because of the denial of it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the awkwardness of what happens. And actually, this is beautiful because this happens to my students. It's happened to me. The awkwardness when we first start to express a part of ourselves that we haven't expressed before. And this is in Invention and Alchemy. In this video, there is a piece that is, many people talk about this piece as being one of the most powerful in the whole show. It's called Catcher in the Rye. And it's about the book, again, it's about the book Catcher in the Rye, and about the moment when the book is saying, Holden Caulfield is saying, you know, what I am, what I want to do in the world is, you know, children are running through the field. I want them to be free, but there's a cliff here and someone needs to catch them. And I am that catcher in the rye. And that was the foundation of the story that I wanted to tell in this piece of music. But I really wanted to tell it with the emotion of it, not just the words of it. And in this video, it's got a huge timpani solo where all this power from the timpani is with the harp, and the harp is playing distorted, but it's also very beautiful. And I remember the very first time when I was first working on this piece, which so many people have now described as powerful and beautiful. But when I was first working on it, I didn't know how to bring out of my head what was inside my head. It was inside my heart. And so when it first came out, it came out awkwardly, like Frankenstein's monster trying to walk. And the reaction to it was negative, only of one person. And when I did the first rehearsal of it, a friend of mine was in the front row. There were only like 5 people there, and she just went, and that was it. That killed it for decades, at least a decade. And so I'm thinking that this is a characteristic of what happens when we start sharing ourselves, that it is going to be awkward, and that might actually reinforce the I'm laughing because I'm thinking it might reinforce our ability, our need to shut down. But fortunately, I'm an artist who needs to make a living. And I think one of the beauties of that, and I've thought of this many times, is that I have to keep going. I have to keep working with these things. I have to get through that because, and I'm not thinking, well, I'm going to get through the awkward time to when I can do this. It's just like, I got to do that. I got to pay the mortgage, So I think that's an advantage that I have. It is the necessity to keep going. But I know many of my students, they've spent years being kind of pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. I see them start to bloom within the academy because it's a safe place. And now I see that I'm starting to bloom in ways in not necessarily a safe place. And I know that that is the experience of most people, because they don't all have an academy that is a safe place with a mentor who's telling them that it's safe. Mm-hmm. So what can they do? What can we do when we're?
Well, I think part of what we have to do is we have to begin to find people who will support and affirm us and not shame us. And, we have to really begin to look at who we are currently in relationship with. And we have to begin to look at, maybe some people are not good for us. Maybe there are people who tear us down. And, I always say, why do we want to tear the people down that we love the most? It's hard enough being in the world. I mean, there's enough the world's going to throw at us. we don't need to make it hard for each other. That's kind of so I think we have to look at the people around us. I think the second thing, and this may really need to be the first thing we do, but they're interwoven. We kind of have to do both simultaneously. So we really have to look at those voices that live inside of us that shame us. And we really have to look at those pockets of energy in us that can still catch us and pull us back to that moment where we were paralyzed. So the moment that you described when you first did Catcher in the Rye and your friend made a face, that moment over the years has obviously been depotentiated, meaning that whatever feeling you had in your body at that time, it's lessened, it's been integrated, it's dissipated. And so now you can tell that story. You may even still remember it every time you play Catcher in the Rye. I don't know. But there's something different. It doesn't stop you. It doesn't have the paralyzing effect because it's been tempered by these other energies in your psyche. It's been tempered by your affirmation, by your joy, by your own sense of satisfaction and fulfillment and knowing the story's been realized in the outer world.
Yeah, and I'm realizing a couple things. I just want to go back and say that I know and you know that when people are shaming us, it's not their intention. It's not their intention to bring us down. It's just that they're passing on to us their ideas of safety that are rampant within them.
Yes.
And I'm realizing I love this idea of relationship and choosing relationships and choosing how we relate to the people we relate to. And I realized one of the turning points in being able to create Catcher in the Rye was seeing this timpanist that I knew I was going to work with, seeing him do a concerto. And I was riveted because I was like, that's the energy I was looking for. That's the voice that I needed to join with my voice to be able to tell this story. And I'm going to say that again because I've never heard myself say that. That's the voice that I needed to be in relationship with, to be able to tell this story. As a creator, of music and whatever and things. Well, for example, you are the voice that I need to be able to tell this story, like our relationship. That's this story with us together.
Right.
So, and I knew that when I knew that as we were sitting in your car and we were having a conversation, and I thought, I don't want this conversation to end. How can this go on? Mm-hmm. So I guess that's what we look for rather than relationships in which we're thinking, how do I get this person to like me? Or am I doing good enough? Or, all of those things. Because I'm always thinking, if I'm like kind of lost in the world and I'm looking for signposts and I'm on a map, I want to be like, look for this, look for that. When you see this, go in that direction. When you see this, go in that direction. And I feel like I really do need those things. So, so what would be, like, if we were going to sort of pull this together, what would be those things that we look for to get in relationship, and so that we are in relationships where our shining will illuminate, will that when that light is going to be met?
Yeah, I keep thinking of a quote where Jung says that wholeness is a result of you and I, that wholeness cannot result unless without relationship to another. So your experience with the timpani player, when you heard him doing the concerto, it was your voice. You felt him express something in you you'd not known how to express. And then in relationship, the two of you could birth that together. That's what we look for, is we look for people and we pay attention to experiences that might happen randomly, like our conversation in the car, where that happens. And then we nurture those relationships. That's what we put energy into. And when we have interactions with people where we experience the opposite, where we start to feel, ew, I don't feel real good about myself, and we start to feel little, or we start to feel shut down, or we start to judge ourselves harshly, then we might say, maybe that relationship is not one I want to nurture. The other thing I want to say is that part of what also happens in the process of wholeness is that when you come together with mutual respect and equanimity, which I'm imagining you and the timpani player did, then you might give him feedback that something needs to be changed, or he might give you feedback about something that didn't feel quite right. But it's given in a spirit of affirming the whole person, affirming, in that case, the project, versus given in the spirit of tearing the other person down. Because unfortunately, sometimes people do want to shame us. Sometimes people do want to tear down someone else. I really am a believer in the goodness, ultimately, of people. And I also know the reality that because some people have had so much of their own distorted experiences, they do intentionally sometimes, and sometimes it's unintentionally, unconsciously, mean to shame someone and make the other feel bad. It's not a pretty thought.
Right.
But I think that I'm coming back to that because sometimes when we're in relationship, someone may say something to us that does hurt our feelings. But if it is said out of a spirit of love and a spirit of kind of helping us be self-aware, that's one thing. If it's said to tear us down and shut us down, that's another.
It's making me think. You're making me think of two things. One is the idea of impulse. That's at the very first principle of the strings of passion, mm-hmm. Creative resonance, and that is that, and the other is addiction. And so let me just go to the addiction first. I know that when people start feeling, when we start feeling put down, we may actually stay in those relationships. We may have an addictive response to want to prove ourselves in that relationship, and that may actually stick us to those, unless we're aware that that's what's happening. And what I realized after years of talking about the first principle of creative resonance, which is impulse, and I always said, we feel an impulse to do, to touch, to be, to create. That's the first step to creative expression. But after teaching it for several years, I realized that that impulse to do, to create, is always in response to us being touched. Mm-hmm. And so in both cases, we're being touched or tweaked. In one case, I was inspired by seeing David Gross's timpani playing, that was the voice that mm-hmm. opened up this story again, because I knew he could help me tell it. So that was, I would say, an impulse to creative resonance. And then we can get tweaked in a way that tweaks our addictive desire to actually make this something work that's not working. So in one, there's this spark of light that this can make this work. And then in the other, there's this spark of like, wait a minute, I have to prove that this can work. Does that sound like I'm hearing that?
You are, and that's making me think about one of the principles that Fairbairn, who is a psychoanalyst, not a Jungian psychoanalyst, but a Freudian, he says that there's nothing stronger than the desire to make a bad object into a good object. So in addiction and in addictive relationships, part of the dynamic is, people are always trying to take what's bad and make it good. So if I just work harder, if I just do this differently, and it doesn't work. And we don't have time to go into where that's rooted, but it's rooted in a very, very primordial, unconscious place in psyche, infant, toddler kind of place where we don't have cognitive awareness. It's again, and it's a bodily response. One sees oneself doing these things and thinks, why am I doing this? But yet the energy in the body, the impulse is to keep doing it. And it's tied to very basic needs for safety. And it's again, one of those places where things get distorted. One is unconsciously trying to keep oneself safe, but they're trying to get that in a way that doesn't. This is the work we do in analysis often, is getting those things separated out. And yeah.
Well, that's where I feel like we've gotten to, and I would love to talk about that. I mean,
Okay.
that's a really powerful idea. What you just said about nothing is stronger. I'll
Yeah.
just paraphrase it. Than us wanting to make something that isn't working work, and that's maybe at the heart of workaholism and other addictions for sure, and relationships, certainly relationships that aren't working. And so we're talking about and relationships and being able to tell the difference between that energy, we're trying to fix something that isn't working, and the energy when we see that someone else is telling that story that we're telling,
Mhm.
and we can tell it together in a new way, or a tool is telling that story in a way, or an idea is telling that story that we're telling, and then we can do that together, and know more we will know more as we go into that journey. And that, I think, going back to this, the very beginning of what we were talking about, which is the fear when
Mhm.
we start shining, the fear of shining. And it sounds like, if I were going to recap, that you're saying, well, there's some real reasons to be afraid of that,
Mhm.
because there are people who really will trigger your shame. And
Mhm.
you've already got it, so all they got to do is just hit the spigot and it's going to open up for you. And that we can be aware of that, we can observe it, we can become aware when we feel we need to prove, and we can start looking and putting our radar out there to start looking for those things that are going to illuminate with us.
Yes, and we can work that part of us that has bought into that very attitude that the person in the outer world is stating that shames us. Because once we deal with that, then as we start to shine, we realize what we offer and our light beam may not resonate with everyone and speak to everyone. And that's okay. And some people, instead of just being able to say, oh, that's not for me now, have to judge and criticize and tear down. But that doesn't change the value and validity of our light beam, of our shining. So the immunity to that attitude in the outside world really is being in relationship with that attitude internally so that it organically gets transformed, and then we just realize that what I have to offer is a value. It resonates with a lot of people, and it doesn't resonate with some people. And that's okay. And if the only way they can say that to me is to be judgmental and critical of what I'm doing, oh, that doesn't feel good. But you know what? That's about them. It's not about me.
Right. And I think the other thing we touched on here, was to get that muscle, to be able to develop that muscle. We need to be with other people who are searching in the same way. We need to
Yes,
be in communities. We
yes,
need to have mentors, whether
yes,
it's a therapist or whether it's a coach or whether it's a teacher. We need to have a mentor who is looking for who we are to
yes,
bring us out, and communities of other people who are also willing to be honest and at looking at bringing themselves out. So
yes.
okay, so it's becoming aware of the difference between being triggered by shame and that, when someone's in resonance or something is in resonance, becoming aware that even when we are triggered by shame, we can disconnect from that part and
Mhm.
realize, aha, that's not a person we should be sharing this with,
Right.
and actively seek people who will open that up with us, those relationships. So I see what you're saying, that we're often in relationship with parts of ourselves and parts of other people that are triggering the, going down into the darkness. And then there are ways to shift and go to where others are helping us to shine our light.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we want, is we want to be in relationship with people who will help us shine our light, who will mirror our light back to us. And when our light gets shined on something in ourselves that's become distorted, that it's shined with the light of compassion, so that we can begin to love that part so that it isn't monstrous anymore.
And as you say that, I know that relationships are always, you know, I don't want to say two-way street, because, we're all going in the same direction, that we can start by really looking for other people's lights.
Absolutely. And David Gross's light playing that timpani mirrored to you that in you. And I'm sure your harp did that for him. And so that's a beautiful example of, again, where we want to put our energies. That where we want to put our energies. And by that point, you had already begun somehow, I'm sure, to make peace with the part of you that that friend mirrored in the audience that day of,
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
And
bringing up more things I want to talk about, like modalities, but we can save those for future.
yes.
Kathleen, thank you so much. I just love unwrapping and opening up these things with you. Thank you.
You are welcome. It's great fun.
Good. I'll look forward to next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.